The snow fell like ash from a gunmetal sky on December 15, 1944, blanketing the Ardennes forest in deceptive tranquility. Private First Class Tommy Morrison pressed his numb fingers against the frozen metal of his M1 Garand, watching his breath crystallize in the bitter air. The 106th Infantry Division had settled into what their commanding officers assured them was a quiet sector of the Western Front. Morrison's foxhole overlooked a vast expanse of pine trees, their branches heavy with snow that muffled even the slightest sound. The silence was profound, almost spiritual, broken only by the occasional crack of a tree branch succumbing to winter's weight. His platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant William Hayes, had been telling anyone who would listen that this Christmas would be different, that they'd be home by New Year's Day. 1940-5.3 miles to the east, hidden beneath carefully constructed camouflage nets, Oberfuhrer Heinrich Weber of the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler adjusted his field glasses. The German officer had been observing American positions for 72 hours, meticulously cataloging defensive positions, supply routes, and the rotation schedules of patrol units. Weber's weathered face bore the scars of 3 years fighting on the Eastern Front, where he had learned that victory belonged to those who struck hardest when the enemy least expected it. The Ardennes had been deliberately chosen by Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt and General Heinz Guderian as the staging ground for Operation Wacht am Rheinwacht on the Rhine. This densely forested region, stretching across eastern Belgium and northern Luxembourg, had historically been considered impassable by large military formations, the same geographical features that made Napoleon bypass it in 1814, and that Kaiser Wilhelm's generals had deemed unsuitable for major operations in 1914, now provided the perfect cover for Hitler's most desperate gambit, according to classified Wehrmacht intelligence reports later captured by Allied forces. The German High Command had assembled over 200,000 men, 600 tanks, and nearly 2,000 artillery pieces in complete secrecy. The massive force included elite units like the 6th Panzer Army, under SS Oberstkruppen Joseph Sepp Dietrich, and the 5th Panzer Army, commanded by General Hasso von Manteuffel. American intelligence had failed catastrophically. The 12th Army Group, under General Omar Bradley, had assessed the Ardennes as requiring minimal defensive presence. The sector was held by just 4 divisions spread across an 85-mile front, a deployment that violated every principle of defensive warfare. The 8th Corps, commanded by Major General Troy Middleton, was tasked with maintaining this impossibly thin line with green recruits and battle-weary veterans. Rotating out of more active sectors, Morrison pulled his wool cap lower over his ears, unaware that approximately 20,000 German soldiers were positioned less than 5 miles from his position. The young soldier from Iowa had joined the Army 18 months earlier, motivated by Pearl Harbor and a desire to serve his country. He had trained at Camp McCoy in Wisconsin, where the winter temperatures had seemed brutal until he experienced the Ardennes in December. As darkness fell on December 15th, RADIO operators across American positions began receiving routine situation reports. "All quiet on the Western Front" became the standard transmission, a phrase borrowed from literature that would soon prove tragically ironic. The irony was not lost on Wehrmacht radio intercept units, who had been monitoring American communications for weeks, mapping command structures and identifying key personnel. The final hours before Operation Wacht am Rhein commenced were marked by an eerie stillness that veteran soldiers would later describe as unnatural. Even the wildlife seemed to sense impending catastrophe, with forest animals retreating deeper into the woods. The stage was set for what would become the largest land battle fought by American forces in European theater, a battle that would test the resolve of democracy against fascism's final, desperate offensive. At exactly 0530 hours on December 16th, 1944, the silence of the Ardennes forest was shattered by the largest artillery barrage launched by German forces since the opening of Operation Barbarossa. 2,000 guns opened fire simultaneously along an 85-mile front, their muzzle flashes illuminating the snow-covered landscape like malevolent lightning. Private Morrison was thrown from his foxhole by the concussion of the first salvo, landing hard against the frozen earth as shell fragments whistled overhead. The bombardment was unlike anything American forces had experienced in the European theater, a calculated display of firepower designed to destroy communications, demoralize defenders, and create gaps in the Allied line through which German Armor could pour dot within the first 30 minutes. Telephone lines connecting forward positions to divisional headquarters were severed. Radio antennas were destroyed by direct hits, leaving isolated American units unable to communicate the scale of the attack developing against them. Staff Sergeant Hayes, who had survived the landings at Normandy and the breakout from Saint-Vith, found himself commanding the company when his captain was killed by a direct mortar hit on the command post. Oberfuhrer Weber's 1st SS Panzer Division began its advance at 0600 hours, following pre-planned routes through the forest that had been reconnoitered for weeks. The elite Waffen-SS unit moved with the precision of a machine, their white-painted tanks and half-tracks ghost-like against the snow. Weber himself led from the front, standing in the cupola of his command Tiger tank, designated Barbarossa, in honor of his Eastern Front service, the German offensive. According to declassified documents from the United States Army Center of Military History, involved 3 separate Army groups advancing on divergent axes. The 6th SS Panzer Army aimed for the port of Antwerp, seeking to split British and American forces while cutting off supplies. To Montgomery's 21st Army Group, the 5th Panzer Army targeted the crucial road junction at Bastogne, while the 7th Army provided flank protection against potential counterattacks. From General George Patton's 3rd Army, American resistance varied dramatically across the front. The 106th Infantry Division, composed largely of recent replacements, found itself overwhelmed within hours. However, pockets of determined defenders began organizing effective resistance almost immediately at the village of Lanzerith. 18 men from the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon of the 99th Infantry Division held off an entire German battalion for nearly 24 hours. Morrison and the survivors of his platoon withdrew through the forest, moving from position to position in a fighting retreat that would characterize much of the early battle. The young private discovered reserves of courage he never knew he possessed, helping carry wounded comrades while maintaining suppressive fire against advancing German infantry. The retreat was conducted in near complete confusion, with units becoming separated and commanders making tactical decisions based on incomplete information. The psychological impact of the German offensive extended far beyond the immediate battle zone. At Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force in Versailles, General Dwight Eisenhower received his first reports of the attack with characteristic calm. But his staff could see the concern in his eyes. The Supreme Allied commander had spent months planning the final push into Germany, and this unexpected German offensive threatened to derail Allied momentum entirely. By nightfall on December 16th, German forces had achieved penetrations of up to 6 miles in some sectors. The mythical West Wall, Germany's defensive line along its western border, seemed suddenly achievable again. Wehrmacht radio broadcasts that evening spoke of a Christmas miracle and the final victory that would drive the Anglo-American invaders back into the sea. However, the first day also revealed critical flaws in German planning. Fuel shortages, which had plagued Wehrmacht operations since 1943, immediately affected armored units. Many panzer divisions were operating on captured fuel, and the failure to secure American supply dumps on schedule threatened the entire operation's sustainability. Additionally, American artillery, though initially disrupted, began reorganizing with devastating effectiveness as the day progressed. The battle for the Ardennes had begun, and neither side fully comprehended the scale of carnage that would follow. December 17th dawned gray and bitter, with temperatures dropping to -10 degrees Fahrenheit. The village of Bastogne, a seemingly insignificant crossroads town in eastern Belgium, was about to become the focal point of one of the war's most crucial battles. 7 major roads converged on this market town of 4,000 civilians, making it strategically vital to both German advance and American defense. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe arrived in Bastogne at 1400 hours with elements of the 101st Airborne Division. The Screaming Eagles had been resting in France after their costly victory in Operation Market Garden when they received emergency orders to reinforce the crumbling Ardennes front. McAuliffe, an artillery officer who had assumed command when the division's regular commander was wounded, surveyed the town's defenses with growing concern. The German 5th Panzer Army, under General Hassel von Manteuffel, was closing on Bastogne from 3 directions. Manteuffel, considered one of Germany's finest tactical commanders, understood that capturing the town intact was essential for maintaining his advance. Toward the Meuse River, his 47 Panzer Corps, spearheaded by the 2nd Panzer Division and Panzer Lehr Division, had already surrounded most of the town by December 18th. Private Morrison and the survivors of his unit had been incorporated into the Bastogne defense perimeter after their regiment's destruction near Schnee-Eifel. The young soldier found himself manning a roadblock on the Ardennes road, armed with a bazooka and 3 rockets, hardly adequate equipment for stopping German tanks. Yet Morrison and thousands of other American soldiers were about to demonstrate that determination could overcome material disadvantage. The encirclement of Bastogne was completed on December 20th, when German forces cut the last road leading west to Neufchâteau. Inside the pocket, McAuliffe commanded approximately 15,000 American troops from various units, including airborne infantry, armored elements, and artillery. Outside the perimeter, an estimated 45,000 German soldiers from multiple divisions prepared for what they expected would be a quick victory. According to wartime records preserved in the National Archives, the siege of Bastogne tested American resolve like no other battle in the European theater. Ammunition ran critically low by December 21st. With artillery units limited to 10 rounds per day per gun, medical supplies were exhausted, forcing surgeons to operate without adequate anesthesia. Food rations were cut to 1 meal per day, and many soldiers survived on melted snow and captured German supplies. The most famous moment of the siege occurred on December 22nd, when German commanders sent a surrender ultimatum to McAuliffe. The message, delivered under a white flag by 2 German officers and 2 enlisted men, demanded the honorable surrender of the American garrison within 2 hours. McAuliffe's reply became legendary, a single word typed on official letterhead: nuts. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Harper, who delivered McAuliffe's response to the German delegation, added his own interpretation: if you don't understand what nuts means, in plain English it is the same as go to hell, and I will tell you something. Else if you continue to attack, we will kill every goddamn German that tries to break into this city. The German response was immediate and violent. Artillery bombardments increased in intensity, and Luftwaffe bombers appearing over the battlefield for the first time in months struck American positions within Bastogne. However, the siege was already beginning to work against German interests. Each day that Bastogne held diverted German forces from the main advance, allowing Allied commanders time to organize counterattacks. Morrison experienced his first real combat during the German assault on December 23rd. Hidden in a foxhole beside the Ardennes road, he watched a column of German tanks approach through the morning mist. When the lead panzer for tank came within 50 yards, Morrison fired his bazooka, scoring a direct hit that disabled the vehicle and blocked the road. The action earned him a Bronze Star, though he would not learn of the decoration until weeks later. Weather conditions on December 23rd proved crucial to American fortunes. Clear skies allowed Allied aircraft to resume operations after days of being grounded by fog and snow. The 9th Air Force launched over 1,100 sorties, targeting German supply lines and troop concentrations. Most importantly for Bastogne's defenders, transport aircraft began dropping supplies by parachute, delivering ammunition, medical supplies, and food to the besieged garrison. The tide was beginning to turn, though neither side yet realized the full implications of Bastogne's continued resistance. December 24th, 1944, brought no Christmas Eve peace to the frozen battlefields of the Ardennes. German forces launched their most determined assault yet against Bastogne's perimeter, while simultaneously pushing advanced elements of the 2nd Panzer Division to within 4 miles of the Meuse River at Dinant. For a brief, terrifying moment, it seemed Hitler's desperate gamble might actually succeed. Oberführer Weber's 1st SS Panzer Division had fought its way through the village of Stavelot, leaving a trail of destruction that would be investigated as war crimes after the conflict's end. The Malmedy Massacre, where SS troops murdered 84 American prisoners of war, had occurred just days earlier, galvanizing American resistance with stories of German atrocities. Weber himself, though not directly involved in the massacre, commanded units whose reputation for brutality preceded them across the battlefield. Inside Bastogne, General McAuliffe moved constantly among his troops, his presence providing crucial morale during the darkest hours of the siege. The airborne general had earned his men's respect through shared hardship, sleeping in the same frozen foxholes, eating the same meager rations, and exposing himself to the same dangers as the lowest. Private Morrison, now serving as an impromptu squad leader after his sergeant's death, found himself part of McAuliffe's personal reconnaissance. When the general toured frontline positions, the German assault on Christmas Eve focused on the northwest sector of Bastogne's perimeter. where elements of the 101st Airborne Division held positions. Around the village of Champs, at 0300 hours, the 901st Panzer Grenadier Regiment, supported by tanks from the 130th Panzer Lehr Regiment, attacked American positions with overwhelming force. The assault nearly succeeded in breaking through to Bastogne Center, before desperate counterattacks by American reserves restored the line. Meanwhile, 60 miles to the north, the German offensive had achieved its deepest penetration. Advanced reconnaissance elements of the 2nd Panzer Division reached Celles, just 4 miles from the Meuse River and the vital bridge at Dinant. If German forces could cross the Meuse in strength, they might yet achieve their objective of capturing Antwerp and splitting the Allied armies. The prospect terrified Allied commanders, who began preparing contingency plans for a general withdrawal. According to classified intelligence reports declassified in 1975 by the Central Intelligence Agency, German forces had advanced over 60 miles in some sectors, creating a bulge in Allied lines that gave the battle its popular name. However, the same reports revealed critical German weaknesses that would prove decisive. Fuel shortages had become catastrophic, with some panzer divisions abandoning perfectly functional tanks due to empty fuel tanks. Additionally, the failure to capture Bastogne had disrupted the entire German supply network. On Christmas morning, Morrison witnessed one of the war's most remarkable sights, when over 200 American transport aircraft dropped supplies to Bastogne's defenders. The mass airdrop, conducted despite heavy German anti-aircraft fire, delivered tons of ammunition, medical supplies, and food. More importantly, it demonstrated to both sides that American air power was reasserting control of the battlefield. The psychological impact of the airdrop extended far beyond its material value. German soldiers, who had been told that Allied air forces were defeated, watched helplessly as hundreds of aircraft operated over their positions with apparent impunity. Conversely, American morale soared as evidence mounted that relief was coming. Radio intercepts later revealed that German unit commanders began reporting declining morale and increasing desertion rates. General George Patton's Third Army had been racing north from Lorraine since December 19th, executing one of the most remarkable military maneuvers in American history. Patton had pivoted 90 degrees with over 200,000 men in 72 hours, demonstrating the mobility and flexibility that characterized American military doctrine. By Christmas Day, advanced elements of the 4th Armored Division were engaging German forces south of Bastogne. The battle reached its climax on December 26th when elements of the 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, broke through German lines and established contact with Bastogne's defenders. First Lieutenant Charles Boggess, commanding the lead Sherman tank, radioed the famous message, "Come on out, this is the 4th Armored." The siege of Bastogne was broken. Though fighting would continue for several more days, Morrison was among the first defenders to meet Patton's relief column, emerging from his foxhole to guide American tanks through German minefields. The young private, now a battle-hardened veteran, had survived 8 days of siege that tested American military resolve like no other battle. In the European theater, the successful defense of Bastogne marked the beginning of Germany's final defeat, though weeks of bitter fighting remained ahead. December 27th marked the beginning of Germany's retreat from its deepest penetration into Allied lines. The Wehrmacht commanders refused to acknowledge the offensive's failure. The 2nd Panzer Division, stranded near Celles without fuel or reinforcements, found itself surrounded by elements of the British 29th Armored Brigade and American forces converging from multiple directions. The destruction of this elite unit symbolized the collapse of Hitler's final gamble in the West. Oberfuhrer Weber received withdrawal orders at 1400 hours, transmitted in a coded message that barely concealed the desperation of German high command. The 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, once the spearhead of German armored might, began a fighting retreat through the same forests where they had advanced with such confidence. 11 days earlier, Weber's Barbarossa tank, damaged by American tank destroyers near Stavelot, was abandoned when its transmission failed, another symbol of German industrial collapse. The relief of Bastogne had galvanized Allied forces across the entire front. General Omar Bradley's 12th Army Group began coordinating massive counterattacks designed to eliminate the German salient entirely. The 1st Army, under General Courtney Hodges, attacked from the north while Patton's 3rd Army drove from the south, creating a classic pincer movement. that threatened to encircle the entire German force. Private Morrison, now promoted to corporal, for his actions during the siege, found himself part of the American advance toward Hofelize. The young soldier, who had cowered in a foxhole 11 days earlier, now led a squad with confidence earned through combat. His unit, rebuilt with replacements and reinforced with battle-tested veterans, moved through snowy forests littered with abandoned German equipment, testimony to the Wehrmacht's hasty retreat. The human cost of the battle was becoming apparent as American forces advanced through recaptured territory. Entire villages had been destroyed, their civilian populations either evacuated or caught in the crossfire between opposing armies. The village of Malmedy, scene of the infamous massacre, presented a particularly grim tableau of war's brutality. American graves registration units worked tirelessly to identify and properly bury both American and German dead, a task complicated by extreme cold that had preserved bodies in the positions where they fell. According to official casualty reports compiled by the Army's Historical Division, American losses in the Ardennes offensive exceeded 19,000 killed and over 6,000 to 7,000 wounded or missing. German casualties were estimated at over 100,000, including the complete destruction of multiple elite divisions. More significantly for Germany's war effort, the Ardennes offensive had consumed the Wehrmacht's last strategic reserves, leaving German forces incapable of conducting major offensive operations. For the remainder of the war, the battle's impact extended far beyond military casualties. German civilians in border regions, who had briefly hoped for their army's resurgence, now faced the reality of inevitable defeat. American industrial capacity, which had supplied the materiel that enabled the successful defense, demonstrated democracy's ability to sustain prolonged conflict against totalitarian aggression. The Soviet Union, observing from the Eastern Front, began planning its final offensive toward Berlin with confidence that German forces would be unable to transfer significant reinforcements from the Western Theater. On January 3, 1945, Allied forces launched Operation Lightning, a coordinated counteroffensive designed to eliminate the German salient entirely. The First and Third Armies attacked simultaneously, supported by massive artillery barrages and airstrikes that dwarfed even the German bombardment of December 16th. Weather conditions had improved dramatically, allowing Allied air power to operate at maximum effectiveness against retreating German columns. Morrison's squad participated in the capture of Hofelize on January 16th, exactly 1 month after the German offensive began. The town, a strategic crossroads that had changed hands multiple times during the battle, lay in ruins, its medieval buildings reduced to rubble by weeks of artillery fire. Yet its capture marked the official elimination of the German salient and the restoration of Allied lines to their pre-offensive positions. The psychological impact of victory in the Ardennes resonated throughout Allied ranks. Soldiers who had questioned their ability to defeat Germany's finest units now possessed unshakable confidence in ultimate victory. The successful defense had demonstrated that American forces could absorb massive surprise attacks and respond with overwhelming counterforce, a lesson that would prove valuable in future conflicts. As January drew to a close, Wehrmacht forces completed their withdrawal behind the Siegfried Line, Germany's pre-war defensive fortifications. The Ardennes offensive, intended to split Allied armies and force a negotiated peace, had instead hastened Germany's collapse by consuming irreplaceable reserves and destroying the myth of German military superiority. February 1945 brought clear skies and rising temperatures to the Ardennes forest, revealing the full scope of destruction wrought by 6 weeks of intensive combat. American engineers worked tirelessly to clear roads of destroyed vehicles and debris, creating massive salvage yards where German and American equipment lay intermingled, testament to the battle's ferocity and ultimate Allied victory. Corporal Morrison stood among the ruins of Bastogne on February 14th, St. Valentine's Day, reflecting on how profoundly the battle had changed him. The young Iowan, who had entered combat as a frightened private, now commanded respect from veteran soldiers twice his age. His Bronze Star citation, finally processed through military bureaucracy, recognized exceptional courage under fire and inspiring leadership during the defense of Bastogne. Yet Morrison understood that thousands of other soldiers deserved similar recognition for their contributions to victory. The strategic implications of German defeat in the Ardennes extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. Adolf Hitler's decision to commit his last reserves to the offensive had created irreversible weakness along Germany's remaining fronts, Soviet forces, observing German deployment westward, launched the Vistula-Oder operation on January 12th, advancing over 300 miles in 3 weeks and reaching positions just 35 miles from Berlin. General Dwight Eisenhower visited the Ardennes battlefield on February 20th, conducting his own assessment of lessons learned from the German surprise attack. The Supreme Allied commander was particularly interested in intelligence failures that had allowed German forces to mass undetected, and in the rapid response that had transformed potential disaster into decisive victory. His after-action report, classified until 1978, praised American resilience while identifying systematic improvements needed. In Allied intelligence gathering, the human cost of the battle continued mounting even after active combat ended. Medical units treating frostbite cases discovered that extreme cold had caused permanent disabilities among hundreds of soldiers who had endured the siege of Bastogne and other extended combat in sub-zero temperatures. Morrison himself suffered chronic pain in his feet, a reminder of nights spent in frozen foxholes that would affect him for the remainder of his life. According to classified post-battle analyses conducted by Allied intelligence services, the Ardennes offensive had achieved exactly the opposite of German intentions. Rather than splitting Allied armies, the battle had demonstrated unprecedented cooperation between American and British forces. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's 21st Army Group had provided crucial support to American units without the inter-Allied friction that had characterized earlier operations. War crimes investigations began immediately after the battles. Conclusion: focusing primarily on the Malmedy massacre and other atrocities committed by SS units during the offensive, the International Military Tribunal, established to prosecute war criminals, would eventually convict over 70 individuals for crimes committed during the Ardennes campaign. These proceedings established important precedents for international humanitarian law and the prosecution of military atrocities. The battle's impact on German civilian morale proved equally decisive. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels had promised that the Ardennes offensive would turn the tide of war, and its failure destroyed remaining German faith in ultimate victory. Civilian resistance to Allied occupation collapsed entirely in border regions, where local populations had witnessed the Wehrmacht's defeat firsthand. On March 7, 1945, elements of the 9th Armored Division captured the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen intact, establishing the first Allied bridgehead across the Rhine River. Many of the units involved had been rebuilt after their destruction in the Ardennes, demonstrating American military resilience and industrial capacity. The rapid exploitation of the Remagen crossing accelerated Germany's final collapse by weeks, if not months. Morrison crossed the Rhine on March 24th as part of Operation Varsity, the largest airborne operation conducted by Allied forces. In Europe, the young soldier who had learned warfare in the frozen forests of the Ardennes now participated in Germany's final defeat with the confidence of a veteran. His unit advanced rapidly through collapsing German resistance, encountering evidence of Nazi atrocities that reinforced their determination to complete Germany's unconditional surrender. The Battle of the Bulge, as it became known in popular memory, represented the last gasp of German military power in Western Europe. Its failure sealed Germany's fate and hastened the war's end, while demonstrating the resilience and adaptability that would characterize American military doctrine for generations to come. May 8, 1945 Victory in Europe Day found Corporal Tommy Morrison in Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, where his unit had linked up with Soviet forces racing westward from the destroyed Reich. The young soldier from Iowa, now a battle-hardened veteran of some of the European theater's fiercest fighting, watched German officers sign documents of unconditional surrender with emotions ranging from relief to profound exhaustion. The Ardennes offensive, Hitler's final gamble in the West, had consumed Germany's last strategic reserves and hastened the Third Reich's collapse by months. What began as Germany's most ambitious counteroffensive since 1940 had evolved into a decisive Allied victory that demonstrated American military resilience and industrial superiority. The Battle of the Bulge entered military history as proof that surprise attacks, regardless of their initial success, could not overcome sustained democratic determination. Morrison's Bronze Star, one of over 3,000 awarded for actions during the Ardennes campaign, represented more than individual heroism. It symbolized the transformation of American citizen soldiers from inexperienced recruits into world-class fighting men. His journey from terrified private to confident squad leader mirrored that of an entire generation that had learned warfare's harsh realities in the frozen forests of Belgium and Luxembourg. The strategic lessons of the Ardennes offensive influenced American military doctrine for decades. The importance of maintaining strategic reserves, the value of rapid reinforcement capabilities, and the decisive impact of air power became cornerstones of Cold War planning. General George Patton's remarkable 90-degree pivot with the Third Army established mobility as a fundamental principle of American tactical thinking, influencing everything from divisional organization to logistics planning. War crimes trials continued throughout 1946, with particular attention focused on SS atrocities committed during the offensive. The Malmedy Massacre trial convicted over 70 defendants and established important precedents for prosecuting military war crimes. These proceedings, conducted under international law, demonstrated Allied commitment to justice even in victory's aftermath, and provided frameworks for future humanitarian interventions. The human cost of the battle extended far beyond immediate casualties. Thousands of American veterans suffered permanent disabilities from frostbite and combat trauma, creating social obligations that influenced post-war veterans' benefits and medical care. Morrison himself struggled with chronic pain and what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress, though such conditions received little understanding in 1945. According to declassified intelligence assessments from the Central Intelligence Agency, the Ardennes offensive's failure marked the psychological breaking point for German resistance. Civilian morale, already weakened by years of bombing and shortages, collapsed entirely when the Wehrmacht's miracle offensive ended in costly defeat. This psychological dimension proved as important as military casualties in hastening Germany's surrender. The battle's impact on European geography and politics proved equally significant. The rapid American response to German attacks strengthened Western European confidence in American security guarantees, influencing post-war alliance structures including the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The successful defense demonstrated that American forces could deploy rapidly to defend democratic allies against totalitarian aggression, a lesson that would prove crucial during the Cold War. Morrison returned to Iowa in September 1945, carrying memories that would haunt him for decades. The young farmer who had left home to serve his country returned as a changed man, shaped by experiences that few civilians could comprehend. His participation in the Ardennes defense became a source of quiet pride, though he rarely discussed the tales of combat with family members who had not shared such experiences. The economic implications of the battle extended throughout the post-war era. American industrial capacity, which had supplied the materiel necessary for successful defense, demonstrated democracy's ability to sustain prolonged conflict against totalitarian enemies. This industrial advantage would prove decisive in subsequent confrontations with the Soviet Union, whose planned economy could not match American productive flexibility. On December 16, 1949, the 5th anniversary of the German offensive, President Harry Truman dedicated the American Battle Monuments Commission Cemetery at Henry Chapelle, Belgium, where over 7,000 American soldiers killed in the Ardennes campaign rest in perpetual honor. Morrison attended the ceremony, finding names of friends and comrades carved in white marble crosses that would remind future generations of democracy's price. The Ardennes offensive ultimately achieved exactly the opposite of German intentions. Rather than splitting Allied armies and forcing negotiated peace, the battle demonstrated unprecedented Allied cooperation and hastened Germany's complete defeat. The frozen front lines of December 1944 became the foundation for American military supremacy that would shape global politics for the remainder of the 20th century and beyond. Corporal Morrison lived until 1998, long enough to see the Soviet Union's collapse and the triumph of democratic values. He had defended in the Ardennes forest. His Bronze Star, displayed in a simple frame in his Iowa farmhouse, represented not just individual courage, but the collective sacrifice of a generation that had preserved freedom for posterity. The battle's true legacy lay not in its tactical details, but in its demonstration that free societies, when tested by totalitarian aggression, possessed reserves of strength that authoritarian regimes could never comprehend or overcome.